Question 38, and this is from the SAT number 17. This is the April QAS 2019 test, and the question says, Burke's central claim in the last paragraph is that the British have done something. So the way to solve this is we need to go back to the last paragraph and sort of figure out basically what is the claim that's being made in this last paragraph here. So let's go down about the British. Let's go down. It's a long paragraph here. If you saw the outline video that I did, you'll have a good sense of how I understand this passage here, but let's see if we can solve it in the context of this question. So it starts off by saying, whatever they are, I wish my countrymen rather to recommend to our neighbors the example of the British Constitution than to take models from them for the improvement of our own. This is a hard sentence here, but this is kind of crucial to understanding what Burke's point is. So it's hard because there's a lot of pronouns and a lot of references that are being made, and we need to sort of figure out who is who in each situation. So I wish my countrymen, so this is Burke's perspective, so my countrymen is going to refer to the British, would recommend to our neighbors, this is going to refer to the French, for the example of the British Constitution, then to take models from them, which is again the French, for the improvement of our own, which is the British. So basically what Burke is saying here is that instead of having the British looking to the French as a source of inspiration for their own government, basically what the British need to do is recommend to the French their own system of government. So this sort of sets up the paragraph where Burke really looks and praises the British Constitution, right? He goes on by saying not really that there's not errors or there's not complaints to be made in Britain, but basically that these don't owe to the Constitution, but instead they owe to the conduct and behavior of citizens. So then we keep going. Basically, he talks about more about the Constitution, basically about how people will find enough value in sort of protecting it. We go down here. He talks about the ancestors of the British, and basically how they designed the Constitution. They designed the Constitution with this in mind, that they knew that human nature was fallible and that they're the ignorance and fallibility of mankind, and that basically there's a humility that's inscribed in the Constitution which the French don't have, and that this is basically a positive thing. So this is sort of the comprehension that we should have if we had gone through the text the first time. So that's why it's taking a little while now. But we can really get most of what the paragraph is about by looking at this first sentence here, which basically again recommends the British Constitution. Looking at the end here, that basically says we should stand on the firm ground of the Constitution rather than admire the attempt to follow the desperate flights of the aeronauts of France. So again, choosing the firm ground of the British Constitution over what the French are doing. And then sort of noticing here that most of what he's talking about is still about the Constitution and the prose of it. So we should expect that our sentence will have something to do with Burke praising the Constitution in favor of basically what the French are doing. So A says that his claim in the last paragraph is that the British have failed to take effective measures to safeguard their rights. Not really true. There's not really any evidence of that in the passage. We would have to see many more sentences about basically how the British have their rights taken and they didn't safeguard them. So we'll get rid of that. B says that they acted wisely to revise rather than to replace their political system. This right here, I think, could be a correct answer choice, because one of the claims that Burke makes is basically he sort of talks about how the forefathers of Britain, basically how they approached the Constitution with a sort of timidity, and they didn't change too much. This is a theme that's mentioned, so I would keep this one just for now. C says that they tried to export their form of government to their neighbors. So we need to be careful with this one. Basically, C, Burke does say that the British should recommend their style of government or their constitution to the French, but he doesn't say that they're actively trying to export or trying to give them that form of government right now. So I think we can get rid of C. D says that the British have left their government essentially unchanged for hundreds of years. Maybe this is true because, again, it sort of implies that they're being cautious about the changes that they make, which is something that the text talks about. The only thing is that unchanged for hundreds of years is a pretty strong claim that we would have to have evidence for. And if we remember, or if we go back to the text, we'll find that here Burke basically says, here, I would follow the example of our ancestors. I would make the reparation as nearly as possible in the style of the building. So this is him talking about repairs. Here he says, I would not exclude alteration neither. but even when I change, it should be to preserve. So again, alteration, he's not opposed to alterations. So he's not saying that they left their government completely unchanged, but just they respect the pace of change and they don't try to change too much. So then B, it pretty much seems to be the answer that we have left, which says they acted wisely to revise rather than replace. And let's see if we have a text that will answer that well. And I think it's actually this right here, which says, I would make the reparation as nearly impossible in the style of the building. We'll start up here. And what I did, I should follow the example of our ancestors. I would make the reparation as nearly as possible in the style of the building. So this is him basically saying, let's follow the example of our ancestors. And the way that they handled change was they made any repairs they did in the style of the building, which basically means instead of sort of changing the foundation of the overall structure, they just repaired it in the same style, trying to preserve what was already there as opposed to creating wholesale change. So that's going to match B, which says they acted wisely to revise rather than to replace the political systems. So we'll choose answer choice B as our correct answer for question 39.